Joining us today in the book club is Graydon Carter, When the Going Was Good. Graydon, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Is an incredibly witty and insightful book, memoir, I should say, that tells us so much that we already, some of it we know about your Vanity Fair career. Internationally, you were renowned for that. But what I particularly love about it was your upbringing. I learned so much that I did not know in Canada. How you started in the Canadian Railroad. I think you had a job for like...
No, that was a job. That was parents. When I was growing up in your late teens, parents sent their children out west to toughen them up and do some character building. And
Did it?
yeah,
Did it work?
Yeah, it was one of my favorite jobs ever. Strange enough, I lived for 6 months in a boxcar with 11 men. Most of them were convicts, and we climbed telegraph poles all day in the hot sun, and played a lot of cards at night. And I learned profanities that I never knew existed before. But I did come back a lot tougher. I actually had some muscles on me, which I'd never had before, and it was a great, wonderful experience.
How did those years shape you then?
Well, growing up in Canada, first of all, it's not as temperate as say London or Southern California, and if you play hockey, I played hockey for like I don't know, till I was like 15. You're playing often on minus 30 degree weather. That's American, minus 30 degrees, and the same thing with skiing. So it toughens you up a bit, and it sort of prepares you for the road ahead.
And very early on in your book, you could tell that you had stars in your eyes. You wanted to make something out of yourself. At what point did you decide that New York was the place for that?
New York was always a sort of gravitational pull for me. The way some people gravitate to Paris or London if you're living in Canada or Southern California. And I, just through, magazines and movies, that was the place I wanted to be. I knew I wanted to be a writer of some sort. And the two books, my favorite books are Act One and Youngblood Hawk, are both about people who came to New York and to sort of make a little difference in the city.
And what was New York like at that time?
Oh my gosh, this was 1978, and it was just a filthy, crime-ridden. This was the middle of July when I arrived there. Just boiling hot. There was graffiti everywhere. There was prostitution. The criminal element had run wild. The city was out of control. And as I say in my book, I literally had never been happier in my life.
It certainly had a lot of character.
It had a lot of character, yes.
And you worked, in case our viewers don't know, you worked across various publications over your career. You founded Spy. You worked at Time Magazine, Vanity Fair. You always kept going back, and you continue to write until today. What is it about magazines that is so attractive to you? What do you love about it?
Well, it's funny because a lot of people gravitate to newspapers. Magazines, to me, told you more about the way people lived. Newspapers told you about what happened. And since it was such a big part of my life when I was growing up, we got Time Magazine and Life and Esquire and The New Yorker. And also the stories could be longer and have sort of a narrative pull to them, and that attracted me as well. And I love the feel of magazines. I think they were a brilliant invention, and it pains me to see them diminish. Although two of my favorite magazines in the world are produced right here in the city, and you would never know there was a recession in 2008. The Oldie and Private Eye, both created by Richard Ingram.
Yeah, Private Eye is fantastic.
It's phenomenal. It's as good as it was 40 years ago.
And just, going back to Vanity Fair, and in particular your book, you spend a lot of time in this book writing and speaking about the writers and the editors, which took me by surprise. Why did you decide to do that? Why did you decide to give them so much space and so much space in this book? Why was that important? Really?
Well, the people don't buy a magazine based on the editor. They buy a magazine based on the writing, and in the case of Vanity Fair, the photography. And I was fortunate enough that over that 25-year period, I built up a stable of I mean, one of the greatest stables of writers and photographers ever. So if you have somebody like Annie Leibovitz, she's the star. I'm not the star. I'm the little guy behind the scenes, filling the nut bowls and making sure her coffee is hot.
And what would you say, I mean, when you look now at magazines and the turn it's taken, I suppose, and how it's shifted in terms of, we're seeing a bit of a decline in when it comes to magazines?
Well, as I say, I find it upsetting. At the same time, I think that if magazine companies invested in making their magazines more magazine-y with better paper and maybe larger size, and that young people are going to find magazines the way they just rediscovered vinyl. I think if you go to, it's certainly in New York, these hipster magazine places where they have magazines from all over the world, you'll see it's a great market still for well-produced magazines. Most of these are visual rather than prose. But it'll go in cycles. It will never go back to what it was.
Yeah. And, what is beautiful about this book is that you kind of describe the golden age of journalism. There were no budget restraints, it seems, from what you wrote.
Well, there were at a certain point, but
slightly
yes.
looser,
yes.
right? And we know, because I started out a financial journalist, how the financial crisis, how much that changed everything, and the strain it put on advertising. Besides that, what else shifted that?
Well, just in New York City, there used to be a new, first of all, if you walk through New York City in the 1990s or the 80s, you saw magazines everywhere because there were newsstands everywhere. So it was sort of part of the fabric of New York. Same thing as in London and other major cities. And gradually, those kiosks, the newsstand kiosks, they sort of disappeared. They were mom and pop operations, many of them run by veterans. And I think as the magazine business declined, their business declined, and there used to be a newsstand in every major building in New York. And so just the visibility of seeing magazines on a walk disappeared. And look, the internet, it was voracious, and it picked off the newspapers first. Then it picked off the weekly magazines, and then it's going after the monthlies now.
I mean, I remember saving my pocket money just to buy a magazine. It was super exciting. It's like developing films, rather, right? And we'd be able to take photos.
And also you'd see people getting on an airplane with a tote bag with 6 or 7 magazines for a transatlantic flight, and now they bring their phone on. Yeah.
And look, you have written and you have spoken, and I've seen in some of the interviews you've done as well, and actually you describe in various chapters your relationship, I don't know if I should call it relationship, a friendship with, acquaintance with the current president, Donald Trump.
Yes,
and you talk about him in the book. In fact, let me put it here. I think I wrote it down. Here we go. 217. We can talk about that because you wrote a piece in GQ, right? I think you spent 3 weeks with him.
40 years ago.
40 years ago. First, before I read this part, can you tell me what that was like, those three weeks?
Well, he was sort of a new up and coming developer, nowhere near the biggest developer in New York, but he was making a lot of he was in the tabloids a lot, making headlines. And I had a vague idea who he was. It wasn't my idea. I was assigned the story. It was his first national exposure, so I spent a lot of time with him. And we've had a complicated relationship for the last 40 years. He invited me to one of his weddings. He's tried to be friends, but it couldn't hold.
And you notably, of course, wrote about how his hands were too small in comparison to his body. And you write, page 270, my durably contentious relationship with Trump had begun with the observation I made in my 1984 profile of him in GQ. His first major national exposure to the effect that he had remarkably small, if neatly groomed hands. This was ratcheted up to short-fingered vulgarian in the pages of Spy. When I got to Vanity Fair, the transactional Trump realized that a strategy shift was in order. Notes complimenting me on an article or particular issue began to come my way. And then you go through some of the things like sending you vodka, sending you ties. First of all, are you even surprised, Graydon, that he is president? He is where he is right now?
I mean, astounded, and astounded that he's come back a second time, given what happened in the 4 years prior to this year. And he's sort of a different person. He had a sort of charming salesman's manner. His sort of patter was that of a very successful salesman back in the olden days. And I didn't foresee the sort of wanton brutality in him that I see now. And perhaps that's something with age, and perhaps it's something with achieving the sort of power that he never imagined having. But it's complicated watching him, because that's the most powerful spot in the world, and you can do a lot of good or a lot of damage.
Indeed, and you became, his favorite frenemy.
He's got many more.
I'm sure he has
I'm
many.
way down the list now.
But I read that you printed and you framed some of the tweets that he put out about you.
I blew them up to about this big, had them framed, and had them all inside my wall at Vanity Fair. There was like 48 of them, and I thought a lot of them were funny, and he called me a loser. He called me dopey. He called me sleepy. I think he probably just seen Snow White the night he tweeted those out.
He used dopey and loser quite a bit, though.
Yeah, I know. It's not exclusive to me, but I miss his sort of personal attention, because he hasn't tweeted me since he got back into office.
A badge of honor, perhaps.
A badge of honor, or just I miss the attention, from him.
Well, it keeps us. He's certainly keeping us all in this industry incredibly busy, as you well know. It's frenetic trying to keep up with this administration. I wonder then, when you see, what he was like, you've reported it, you've written about him, you spent time with him, writing about him, those 3 weeks with him. When you hear comments as a Canadian that, not just the tariff wars that we're seeing back and forth, but also those comments that he wants to make Canada a 51st state.
Well, I don't know.
Do you take him at his word when he says this? Do you think he really means it, Graydon?
I think he tries things out orally and in front of people, or in front of television, or in a tweet, or whatever he does, and tries to see whether that flies. It's such an unrealistic thing. I think it just rattled Justin Trudeau back in the day, that I don't think he had a very good relationship with. Mark Carney is more than up for handling Trump at this point. It's not going to happen, and Americans don't want it, and Canadians don't want it.
Mark Carney's been pretty tough and held his own.
Yes. It's like he's much more clever and drier, and he can handle himself in this situation.
I don't want to spend too much time talking about the current president, but do you imagine? Just take us back to those moments when you wrote that article, and then he then criticized you. And you wrote about his hand being too small for his body. What did he say to you the first time? Did you get a letter? Did you get a call?
No, what he did is he hated the story that he then had sent his employees out to buy up all the copies in New York. As it turns out, and I found this out later, Cy Newhouse, who owned Condé Nast, also owned Random House. And so he told me much later that he saw the sales for Trump's GQ story be so good that he decided there might be a book there. And so over the next few years, this ghostwriter worked on this book, The Art of the Deal. Yeah. And The Art of the Deal led to that Apprentice show he did, and The Apprentice show led to this. So, in my book, I say butterfly's wings. I don't take full credit for this. But.
You saw it coming. Let's go back to really your career. Speak first of all how long it took you to write this book, because before we started recording, I was asking you whether you jotted down some of your memories, because I struggled to remember what I even had last week, what happened last week. How long did it take, and what was that process like, Graydon, first of all?
It was a 4-year process, and I was helped by James Fox, who was a great friend of mine, and he had offered to help me 7 years ago. He said, if you ever want to do a memoir, I'll help you. And I had never thought of it up to that point. But James, first of all, he's got a great work ethic. He's a wonderful company. I'm not a solitary, living in the garret writer. I'm not outside people person either, but I like a partnership. And so he would tell me what's interesting, what's not. I didn't go back to any notes. I thought if it's something I remember, that's probably the most interesting part or the most painful parts. So we we worked on it in London, we worked on it in New York, we worked on it at our place in Connecticut and in Provence, and he made it pleasurable rather than painful.
And, reading it, I was like, what a life. What a life. What an incredible time to live and to be a journalist.
Well, it was a good time, and it was you don't realize it while you're living through that period. You just think this is the way it is, and until it's gone, you say, "Oh my God, that's not the natural order of things." But it was a wonderful time to be a journalist in the magazine business during the 80s, 90s, and aughts.
And you had this incredibly successful career, and you very much paint yourself, and we see from from your writing, as a family man. You always made time to be with your family. How important has that been to you throughout your career? Just speak to balancing those two things out. Because often it's women that are asked, oh, how hard is it to be a woman and to have this career? Answer that as a highly successful man in a very public view of with the role you had.
Well, I have 5 kids, and I pretty much work to be home at 5:30 every night. I might work on manuscripts after they went to bed. I had a stay-at-home a wife, which I think makes a huge difference, and not all working women can do that, and I appreciate that. And but I never used the word career once in my entire life. I never used it in the book. I always thought I just had a succession of jobs, and the jobs were there to put food on the table and a roof over our heads. And only looking back, I realized, okay, it's a bit of a career, but I just always thought of it as I'm really lucky to have this job.
And you clearly loved every moment of it. Your children, have they read it? What have they told you?
Oh no, they've all read it. Some had fact-checking notes, and they they all approved it, and I gave it to a number of friends before I turned in the manuscript just to correct things. I have a friend, one of my closest friends, we started off a Time together in 1978, and he's got a phenomenal memory, and he's got a fact checker's memory, and so I gave it to him for him to correct things, and then I hired a fact checker just to make sure that after all that, everything was as correct as humanly possible.
There were elements in this, and I know you've spoken about this before. There's an anxiety and nervousness. I have
anxiety right now being with you.
Why?
Because it's just a natural order. Also, I think that actually I think in most jobs, I think being a little anxious is a good thing.
It's a good thing, yeah, I agree with you.
Because it's the opposite of complacency.
Yeah.
And during that golden age, for instance, the golden age is the golden ages because everybody is really good, and the golden age also attracts the best talent. And so, I thought I wake up every morning worried that somebody else was going to do a certain story better than us and get it out first.
How then did you manage that, Graydon, with, being the public face of, Vanity Fair, parties? How because you always feels contradictory.
Beta blockers. I mean, I would nibble off. No, I used to have to do like about 600 introductions at the beginning of every Oscar party when the people came from dinner. And I would have a beta blocker. I'm really good on names and faces.
Yeah.
And after a while, I got to know who everybody was. I knew everybody. But a beta blocker would just help sort of calm things down a bit. And I treated it as like a really important day at the office.
Yeah.
And I didn't have as much fun at the Oscar parties as the guests did, but that was the whole point. The host is there to make sure they have a good time, not to make sure the host has a good time or the hostess.
As you led Vanity Fair, was there ever imposter syndrome, as we're talking about, anxiousness and nervousness? Did you ever feel that?
Every day. I mean, I think there's. Then at a certain point, you think, okay, I'm doing okay at this, and I'm not an imposter. But it actually more anxiety than that.
Right.
And as I say, I think that I can tell a magazine or a TV show or something that's put up by people who are complacent than people who are anxious and wanting to please, because basically I always treated it as I was in the service business and I wanted to work as hard as humanly possible and get my staff to work together to produce a magazine to give to you once a month that would really make you happy and fill a certain number of hours. And I figured then you'd come back to us for the next month, and that's a business.
And you write at the end of your book that you had this vision of retiring once you left Vanity Fair, going to the south of France. That never happened.
Well, it sort of did. I mean, no, I wrote 2,000 thank you notes to people who'd written me after I left Vanity Fair, and then I sort of my wife and I were very happy there, and the air is great, and the sky and the smells, but then I sort of started tinkering with something, and I thought I could do this in a small way, and this airmail, and it's a digital weekly that comes out on Saturday, and it's the opposite of all the news that happened that week. So it's something that you could read on Saturday morning without hanging your head in despair. And so that was like, we started it 6 years ago, and we have, I don't know, 40 staff members, and I work with a lot of colleagues I worked with in the past, and a bunch of young rookies.
It's not quite retirement, though, is it? I mean,
it's not.
You couldn't really let go, could you?
Well, if you work in the intellectual property business, you can keep going. If you're obviously lifting bricks and 65 comes along, it's probably a good idea to retire. But it does not involve like any great physical exertion, and it sort of keeps your mind such as it is somewhat sharp.
I love the end of your book where you have examples, like lessons, really. For all of us.
Oh yeah, well, yes, okay. There are lessons that helped me.
Lessons that helped you that actually
muddle through life. Yeah, okay.
Tips for many of us. I think one of the ones that stood out for me was always have an exit strategy, like know your exit rather than your entrance. Why was that important? Why is that important?
Well, first of all, job-wise, I always had a plan B in case I lost the job, because I had those 5 mouths and the roof and the food to put on the table. In a large, say you go to a huge dinner where there's a lot of people, I would bribe pretty much as the time the dishes were going down, and then people start standing up when the desserts arrive, and I thought that's the time to make a quiet exit. So my wife and I would go like Navy SEALs. We have signals, and she'd go one way and I'd go the other way, and we'd meet outside and be in the car on the way home while other people are still mingling. Because I just thought, chances are I went to that dinner out of duty rather than out of pleasure.
Yeah.
I just wanted to get home.
You wanted to be with your family.
Yes.
That's so important. Also, I loved, which I really agree with you on this, is take a job because you love it, not so much because of what it pays.
Depends. I mean, I turned down a number of jobs that would have paid a lot more, but I thought, I love what I did, and I thought, and once you get a job under control, you can control your time a bit more, which means more time for family. New jobs, the first couple of years, it's a nightmare trying to be home on time, and the money will come at a certain point in a career. There I use the word career, but I mean in a professional life.
And finally, whilst I have you here, can I ask you to critique media right now? I'm seeing, the likes of CNN, how you've seen and how it is today. I mean, we have, like I said to you, quite a challenge holding power to account and keeping on top of this administration. How do you see the shift in I think
basically
landscape?
Newspapers, television news, and magazines have done a phenomenal job. And it's funny, like 10 years ago, you never would see the word lie in a story, at least in the New York Times, and they would use prevarication or an untruth. And now you see the word lie is just sprinkled throughout so many other stories. And that makes it tough. And but I think that there's great journalism being produced now. It's produced in a different format. And I think that the television news people have done a phenomenal job. And because there's so much news. Yeah. I mean, you have the dust up in Kashmir, and it's like the 8th news story of the night. So I appreciate just, people on television, talking live and keeping their minds around all of this. Yeah. Nicole Wallace is a friend of mine, and she's on MSNBC, and she handles talking to 8 people for 2 hours live on television. Yeah. I thought I couldn't do that for 10 minutes. I couldn't do that for 1 minute.
And it's it seems to be the stories are incredibly heavy, and there's so much misery, unfortunately, so much conflict.
Yes.
It does definitely put a strain. And really appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you so much. You've got a book there. Wonderful. I'm just going to pass you our pen.
Okay.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Right.
So much.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.